Hello, everybody. My name is Joe Liebezeit. I'm a staff scientist at Portland Audubon, and today I'll be talking to you about the Hayden Island Cat Project, and I'll specifically be talking about the Talia animal counting app that we used in the last 2 years of this project, and it was a greatly helpful tool. Before I begin, I do want to thank our partners and also talk a little bit more about Portland Audubon. Portland Audubon is a environmental conservation organization, and we worked with the Feral Cat Coalition of Oregon, which is an animal welfare group, of course, focused on feral and stray cats, as well as Multnomah County Animal Services. And one thing I wanted to stress is that sometimes it's unusual for an environmental conservation organization like Portland Audubon to collaborate with an animal welfare group like the Feral Cat Coalition. But we had worked together for a number of years and had built trust between our organizations. And also we have a common underlying goal, which is for us in the conservation community, we are, of course, concerned about the welfare of birds and other wildlife and the habitats they dwell in. And of course, cats can come into conflict with this. And so we encourage our members to keep cats safe indoors as much as they can in a way to minimize impacts to wildlife. And for groups, for the Feral Cat Coalition, they have similar concerns about the welfare of cats out in the environment, which are exposed to so many hazards and have a much shorter lifespan than cats that are cared for indoors. So that's kind of where our organizations overlap and align. So jumping right into talking to you about the cat count. First of all, I want to orient you to where we do this work. Hayden Island is an island in Portland, Oregon, and which is represented by this red circle here in the United States, on the west coast of the United States. And if you look down at the aerial map below, this red circle basically shows the approximate area of the study site. And I will show a map that's much more detailed in a little bit. But just to say that Hayden Island is a long island that's within the Columbia River, which separates the state of Washington to the north and the state of Oregon to the south. So the Hayden Island Cat Project ran, actually it just wrapped up this past year, but it ran from 2014 to 2021. So we have 8 years of data. And the goal of the project was to assess the effectiveness of trap, neuter, return, or TNR, and other strategies like cat adoption and outreach to reduce and stabilize the free roaming cat population on Hayden Island. And for those of you who are not familiar with TNR, it's encapsulated right here in this graphic. So basically, in the way we worked it out at Hayden Island is that the Feral Cat Coalition would come onto the island, work with the local community and trap feral and stray cats, bring them back to their facility, have their veterinarians sterilize them, and then they would be brought back to the island where members of the community would care for them. In other places of the world, this is called ABC, or animal birth control, or CNVR, catcher, neuter, vaccinate, and release. And one thing I really wanted to stress with this project, and that made it more successful, is working with the local people that live on the island was critical to build trust with them and to help them collaborate with us. So here's a more detailed view of the Hayden Island study site. We basically split it out into about 5 different land use areas for the purposes of our study. And each of those land use areas represents some kind of different use on the island. So starting out from the west side, we have a natural area, which has a higher wildlife value than other areas on the island. And so this area in particular, Portland Audubon did not want to see did not want to see feral and stray cats getting into to impact wildlife. When you go to the east, you have the light industrial area, which is basically a small business park. And the pink areas that I have pointing to right here were areas that were not able to access, so they were not included in the survey effort. The yellow outlined area is the manufactured home community, and that's a residential area. And that, in fact, is an area that we knew prior to working on the island had a cat overpopulation issue. Moving further east, we have the box store community, or our box store area, which is right here. And then finally, to the very far east of the study site is more residential area, and also the highway corridor for Interstate 5, which runs through the island. Before I move on from this slide, I want to point out that the reason we chose this island for the study is because it's an island, and so immigration of cats often on the island was minimized. And also, like I mentioned before, we knew the local community members and we'd worked with them on other issues before, so we had a common source of collaboration before. And we also, as I said before, also knew about the cat overpopulation issue. So in order to meet the objectives, or meet the goal of the project, we had to, number one, estimate the feral and stray cat sterilization rates on the island. We did this by, of course, doing our road counts and looking for cats with an ear that was tipped. I'll talk a bit more about that in the next few slides. We also had to track the population trends annually over time. And finally, we wanted to look at cat distribution on the island and see how it related to staying in one place, being sedentary near their feeding stations, or moving further afield. We did this work, we did our road surveys with trained volunteers or community scientists that dedicated their time to helping out in this project. And in this picture here, you can see me with a couple of our community scientists. So the methods for doing the count, we basically did 3 road surveys every year. We did them in September. We did them about a week apart. And for each of those surveys, we had small groups of observers go in those different plots that I showed you in the study area map. There are about 9 of them. And each of them, during the same time, conducted the road surveys following the road transects along the island. And we collected key information during the surveys. Of course, cat location, whether the animals were ear tipped or not, whether they had a collar. I'll talk more about that in a subsequent slide. So the old way we did these surveys before we used the Talia app was to use paper forms and clipboards, of course. And so here you can I show you what we provided volunteers after they were trained and they were ready to do their surveys. We had a data form, which you can see here on the left side, where they could write down all the critical information for each cat observed. And then on the right side here, we also provided them a paper map of the plot that they did their survey in. And if you look closely at that map, you can see the road network, which we used green lines to indicate where they had to walk on the transect. You can see these red marker colorings over the green, which is where people rode in where they had already covered, so we wouldn't cover the same areas. And then you can see these circles here with numbers in them. Those are the cat locations that we tracked. So in 2020, a few years into the project, I got a call, or I got an email from Ellie Hibby about this Talia app, and she asked us if we wanted to try using it for the Hayden Island count. And we were, of course, very interested, and we partnered up with ICAM. So for setting up the sandboxes, we basically just used the land use areas that we had delineated previously. So here's an example, and we have 9 of those, representing the different land use areas and different plots that we split up into smaller units. And so here's a paper map, for example, of the manufactured home community 1 plot right here. And we basically used Google Earth to plot out those transect lines. And then just for that one area, that was our sandbox for that particular plot. We didn't need to put boundaries around those plots because it was just the gridded network of roads that we needed to monitor. So that was unnecessary in using the app. And yeah, so it made it a lot easier not using any paper forms or maps anymore. We could have this, all of our information right on our phones. So for the survey template, we came up with 7 questions. And again, these were questions we had volunteers answer before we used the Talia app, but the Talia app made it very user-friendly. And I'll demonstrate that moving forward, showing you with this, how we collected data here. So after, of course, the first thing we wanted to do was find the cats on the ground, and that could be done as you're walking along with your app. Once you see a cat, you mark it on your phone with the touch of a finger, which is very simple. And then it brings up a series of the 7 questions. So the first one was the cat ear tipped or not? And this is what it looked like in the Talia app. So was the cat ear tipped on the left or the right? Were the ears intact, or was it unknown? And so for this hypothetical example, the ear was tipped on the left. And you can see that not really a lot of text involved here, just looking at pictures and touching the picture that corresponds to the data point. So the next question was, does the cat have a collar or no collar, or was it difficult to tell or unknown? And so in this hypothetical example, it had no collar. And knowing if a cat had collar or not is helpful for determining whether the cat was a feral cat or a pet cat. And then the next question was the age of the cat. Was it a juvenile, adult, or unknown? And you can see as you go along and answer each question, the completed questions are in view above. So in this example, it was an adult. Next question was the cat social? Was it friendly, or did it avoid people? And again, this is another data point that helps us to separate pet cats from feral or stray cats. In this case, it was a cat that was avoiding people, so more likely a feral cat. The next question was, what was the health condition of the cat? Was it healthy, unhealthy, or unknown? In this hypothetical example, we called it unknown. And some of these questions are more subjective than others, as you can see. And the final question was, what was the color pattern on the cat, the color pattern of the fur? And we had a number of examples that folks could select from. In this case, it was a calico cat. And then after that, you're done, and you can go on to, you can add that or save that sighting and then go on to the next sighting. And so you get a really good idea of how it works for us in the field. So before I end the presentation, I want to present some of the slides of some of the findings where some of our results we're finding for this project, and then talk about some of the pros and cons of using the Talia app. So first of all, through this project, through the years we've been doing it, we've been able to track cat locations. And as you can see, most of the cats we're detecting, free roaming cats, are in the manufactured home community. This we kind of knew beforehand, but we hadn't been quantified. So now we actually have it quantified. And this has been something that we did with the Talia app as well. In terms of our sterilization rate, we found, based on the ear tip information, again, if the ear is tipped, it indicates the cat was sterilized, and it indicates it's a feral cat that was sterilized. We documented a 38% increase in the sterilization rate from 2014 to 2018. The literature says you need more than that to see a population decrease, but we're have gone quite a ways toward that. And the final slide I'll show you is our population trend from 2014 to 2018. And we have 3 more years of data that are in the process of being analyzed right now. And so I'm not presenting them today. But from 2014 to 2018, you can see population trend of the free roaming cats on the island went up a little bit and then started to come down. This trend is not statistically significant. You can see the confidence intervals around that estimate. So basically, we're seeing a relatively stable free roaming cat population. Hopefully, in the last 3 years, we'll see more of a decline. We also documented that the cats are sticking around close to the feeding stations and not going out into other parts of the island, including that area of high wildlife importance, that natural area. And yeah, so those are some of our preliminary findings for this project. So the last couple of slides here, I just want to talk to you about some of the lessons learned of using the Talia app. For some of the pros or the advantages of using the app, number one, it's much more efficient than using paper, and you don't have any data entry after the field season from your paper forms to a database. That minimizes data errors or data loss if you lose a paper form, obviously. We found the app to be relatively user-friendly for most people. And it's easier to adjust the sampling scheme if needed. We, at one point, divided one of our study plots, further divided it into two smaller areas because we had a lot of volunteers. And that's easy to do in the Thalia app. You just do your Google Earth split of your transect and then create the new sandbox and upload it into the app, and you're good to go. Whereas with the paper maps, it took a lot more steps and more work to do that. Also, one thing I didn't talk a lot about is in Thalia, you can create these reporting summaries. We did one for quickly give us an estimate after each survey of what the percentage of cats that were sterilized or ear tipped were, and also the number of cats per kilometer. And so we could report to our collaborators very quickly what we were finding in our study, which would have been harder to do with the paper forms. In terms of the disadvantages of using Thalia, there really weren't many. I guess the biggest one was that the Thalia app is restricted to Android users. And a lot of our volunteers in Oregon use iPhones. And so those folks could still participate in the surveys by spotting cats and dictating what they're seeing to an observer that had an Android phone, which is what we ended up doing. So it was a little tricky to find volunteers that had Androids, but we did find enough for each survey. And so that worked out. I mentioned before that it's a relatively user-friendly app, and it is, but there are always a few volunteers, especially folks that are a little bit older, that have a struggle a little bit learning the new applications, and so that was a little bit of an issue, but not a big deal. The final thing I'll say is that since we had been collecting data prior to using the Thalia app, we had set up our database in a different way than the way that Thalia spits it out once you download a CSV and Excel file from it. So that took a little work getting the Thalia data into the same format of our previous database, but that again is not a big deal. So with that, I'll end my presentation, and we'll take questions when the time comes. Thanks very much.